chaplain director of the Lear Center. Delighted to have you here, and also delighted to have a number of distinguished guests whom I'll mention in a moment. The Lear Center's mission is to study and shape the impact of media on society, media and entertainment, and I always like to find in the day's paper something that's relevant to what we're doing, and every time I've gone on that search, I have never been disappointed. And in today's New York Times, there is a story, the front of the business section, about a telenovela on the network Telemundo. It's called Más Sabe el Diablo, The Devil Knows Best. And the lead character is a woman named Perla Beltran, whose husband was a thief who was murdered, and she sells pupusas on the street. And in an upcoming episode, a census taker is going to meet her and explain what the upcoming 2010 census is, and ultimately she will become a census taker. That storyline is running because there is hope in the Hispanic community for a full and adequate count, but there is also fear in the Hispanic community that being counted is the step toward deportation. So this show is using a storyline in a 5-night-a-week serial soap opera in prime time in order to communicate a pro-social message to its watchers. And that's the topic we're going to be up to today. We're going to talk about a field called entertainment education. And you're going to hear a lot about it in a moment. I just, before we begin, wanted to say how pleased I am that a number of people have been able to make it, some from quite far away. There's an award that our guest of honor and speaker has won, and he's going to receive the trophy this evening. And we're happy that 2 previous winners of that award are here. And so I wanted you to join me in applauding and recognizing, but hang on a second, the director of the Population Communication Institute?
Population Media Center.
Sorry, Population Media Center. They keep changing the name on me. Which has worked all over the world. The man who has directed it, and as well, the graduate of our PhD program, who has taken entertainment education all over the world, and both these people have worked with the person for whom this award is named, Ev Rogers. So please join me in welcoming Arvind Singhal and David Poindexter. Bravo. Now, there are many other distinguished people here. You know who you are.
Can we stand up?
I would like now to introduce Peter Clark, who is a professor on the School of Communication faculty here at the Annenberg, and he is also the chair of the jury which annually selects the winner of this prize. And he's going to tell you a little bit about the prize, why it exists, and he will introduce our speaker, whom we're incredibly lucky to have with us today. Peter?
Thank you, Marty. I first became a colleague of Ev Rogers in 1975 when he came to the University of Michigan. He had been at Michigan State. Previous to that, he was on the Michigan faculty for a number of years, left there to go to Stanford. And then I came out here to be dean of the school, and we were able to persuade Ev to leave Stanford and to come to Annenberg. And so I knew Ev Rogers not only across a very broad span of time. 1975 maybe antedate the birth date of many people in this room, but also at a couple of institutions. And in addition to being a remarkable scholar and the really major figure to launch entertainment education studies worldwide. He was a remarkable human being and a joy to know and to be with. And so as this part of the year rolls around and my committee and I have the joyous opportunity to select yet another individual to in whose spirit, in whose work you find the spirit of Ev Rogers' career, it's really a very rewarding experience. You've just met two previous recipients of the Everett M. Rogers Award for Education Entertainment. Two others who couldn't be here are Miguel Sabido and Al Bandura, and I think you can sense from that collective roster the distinguished company in which this year's award recipient is about to join. And it's a very logical choice. Garth, as many of you know, launched Soul City in the early 90s, perhaps the most sustainable application of education entertainment. Not resting on that laurel, he has formed yet another project called Heartlines, which more generally addresses issues of human values. He's just a remarkable, what I think the category should be, social entrepreneur. He's an Ashoka Fellow. Those of you who know of the Ashoka Fellows movement, which identifies leading social entrepreneurs worldwide, I urge you to go on that website to get a sense of the honor that has recognized Garth's work. Garth is trained as a physician, and he brings certainly a physician's sensitivity and sensibility to his work, but he also blends a real scholarly insight and a real sense for what can be done practically on the ground to get important things done. And I'm so pleased that he's here today to tell us more about his work and share in particular some of the latest experiences which perhaps many people in this room haven't had a chance to get in contact with. So it's my very great pleasure to introduce for you Garth Japhet.
Thanks so much, and good afternoon to all of you. And what an honor this really is for me. I think you were saying I had the privilege of knowing Ev. I met him and Karine on a couple of occasions, and it's a fantastic honor to receive an award in his name, and also to join illustrious people like my friend Arvind, David Poindexter, and to thank you also to the Norman Lear Center and to Marty for the work that you do here and the opportunity to come and address you. Sandra, thank you, and the Hollywood Health and Society. I think you guys are at the center of pretty much the center, and really commend the work that you do. And then just finally, Mandy, thank you so much for all the logistical support. I think it's about 3 in the morning in South African time, and she somehow managed to have me here with my eyes open. So I just thank you all for that. What this is going to be is actually a bit of a journey, a little bit of a story, because I actually think stories are probably, otherwise we wouldn't be doing it, the most compelling way of taking people through a path of thinking. And I've entitled it Me, Mandela, and the Media, and I just did that for a range of reasons. One is I thought Mandela might be one person that all of you know, and then I liked the ma. That seemed to work as well. And I had the pleasure on a few occasions of actually meeting Mr. Mandela. So I was born in South Africa in '63, and that there is not me. I looked at the mugshots of me as a small baby and decided against it. So thank you to Google Images. And I was born in this place here, Johannesburg, which some of you may have heard of as the heart of darkness, but it's not. It's actually quite a nice place. And I was born into a society that was very divided, as you know, racially divided. I grew up in the heart of apartheid, and that was my reality. But I also was extraordinarily fortunate to have parents that actually basically understood the injustices of the time that we were living in. And so from a very early age, I learned to question the rights and wrongs of our society. It's, you know, being a South African is both a blessing and a curse. It's having lived continuously with change through most of my life. So your global financial crisis, what crisis? It was just yet another crisis as far as I'm concerned. But essentially we've moved, and it became quite clear to me quite early on that I really wanted to make a difference. I wanted to do something that would contribute to making a change in the country that I was born into. And so, funnily enough, and I trace it back, I think one of the key things that started me thinking about narrative and about being a doctor was a series of books written by this man, Paul White, called The Jungle Doctor, which I read very much at the age of about 11, 12, 13. And I really liked this idea of the sort of doctor in the Land Rover with the, you know, giraffes and things, and then doing the operations by candlelight and saving people and wild rivers, and, you know, this appealed to my romantic side. And so I have no doubt that that was one of the key reasons why I went and did medicine, was I really liked the idea that one could make a difference in this way. But strangely, all my leanings were the arts. So everyone said, you can do what you like, but don't do medicine. So that solved it. I did medicine. So I was on a mission through medicine to save the world, and I was also a pimply, acne-ridden teenager, so I think that also was a fairly attractive sort of prospect for me as well. And I went and I qualified and ended up working for the first 2 or 3 years of my career in largely rural area of South Africa. Actually, somebody with a big South African t-shirt on here was there in an area called Pietermaritzburg, which is largely a rural area. And my clinical practice at that stage was very much around people who had a whole range of issues which were largely preventable. And being a clinical doctor in that setting was very frustrating, seeing up to 100 people a day, and with largely preventable diseases. This was the #1, sorry for the picture, you can blame Google again, but this was the #1 cause of child death in South Africa at that time. And I remember seeing more than one child per week coming in dehydrated, that's what kills them, and dying of a completely preventable illness. And I suppose this experience really got me to start thinking about how on earth does one, you know, not just treat the symptoms, but actually get out there and start making a difference to the issues, reach people with knowledge, change behavior, and so on. And this was an interesting time. Again, as I say, I've not yet lived in a non-interesting time, but this was one of the interesting times in our history. And we're talking now the beginning of the 90s. And in February 1990, Nelson Mandela was released from prison. And so it was a time of intense social change. You know, everything was being turned on its head in terms of, you know, what we had been used to, the political order. And I was very fortunate because it was a time, in a way, a bit like this time, where one was encouraged to actually look for new solutions to old problems. The old system was not working, as we have seen with the global financial system. And suddenly there was an opportunity here, which I wasn't really aware of except in retrospect, to innovate. And I was also, at this stage, there was also in the area I was working a lot of political violence. So the issues were compounded by violence, refugees, and it again was against this backdrop that a lot of the sort of almost desperation was, sometimes desperation is a good tool for innovation. You know, how do we reach people in a way that will resonate with them? And so, as you Americans would say, it was a sort of no-brainer for me that what people are getting is media. You know, media is telling us what is normal, how to dress, what is fashionable. It is what is reaching people, particularly those who are beyond any form of school. And the health system does not have the capacity to spend time with people. It just does not. So I was aware of that, and in my very sort of amateur way, I did two things. I started writing for this newspaper, Natal Witness in Pietermaritzburg, and I did long, wordy essays about how it was good for women to go to clinics when they were pregnant, which I'm sure no one ever read. And I went on to Radio Zulu and did a few things like that, and it was just this sort of toe in the water. And also, 3 months after he came out of jail, because I was working with refugees, I had the pleasure of meeting Mr. Mandela for the first time and remembering, boy, you're tall. And he was is an amazingly tall man, but an extraordinary. He is more extraordinary in person than he is in reputation, because I was just a nobody, and yet he was extraordinarily interested in me and what we were doing in this area. So it was one of, I have been fortunate to meet many amazing people in my career, and he is one of them. I then moved back to where I had trained in Johannesburg and started working here in Alexandra Township, which has got 500,000 people in 1 square mile. And what you don't see is that it's actually surrounded by sort of a very affluent suburbs. So, you know, you've got this juxtaposition. And that's me there on the left, and I have a picture, which I couldn't find, of Arvind, me, and Ev standing against that wall, and I couldn't find it. And I then, oh, lucky for the back button. I then, you know, suddenly in this context again, still didn't know what I was going to do, this sort of crisis of where am I going, what am I going to do? And then I was literally sitting on a pavement and suddenly thought, what about television and radio? You know, I played with print, what about television and radio? And I'd started to write for another newspaper called the Sowetan, which is the biggest circulation, mainly black readership newspaper. And suddenly came to me, what about going prime time? What about going where the action is? And what about doing it all the same time? You know, because, you know, if I see it on a billboard and then I see it on television and I hear it on radio, you know, clearly, again, no-brainer, that must be more impactful. And doing it in a way that is actually going to be meaningful to people. I mean, doctors are not good communicators. We don't communicate terribly well. So to do it in a way that would resonate with people's lives, tell stories that would address the issues, but place it in context without sort of saying, you know, diarrhea is an infection of the gastrointestinal tract, which is, you know, the rotavirus is responsible for it, etc. That's doctor speak. So with these ideas, I went to this newspaper and said, look, I want to do television and radio. And to their everlasting credit, they said, we'll back you. And they said, I said, well, you know, I've got to earn a living. I'm full-time as a doctor. And they said, well, we'll pay your salary for 3 months. And I raised a little bit of money. And I then climbed on an aeroplane. And I literally came to the US and decided to try and find who had been thinking about these sort of things. And this was part of the little list. I remember I had X amount of money and I was staying in these sort of $20 a night places with bed bugs, and it was great. It was lovely. And I met Arvind, I think, I'm not sure, was it the first time? No, maybe not. But I went to all of these different institutions. I then crossed the ocean. I went to University of Limburg, which is in the Netherlands. I went to Comic Relief, who do Red Nose Day in the UK, the BBC World Service Trust. And I came back not having changed broadly, having been now exposed for the first time really to the fact that there was a world out there with people like David Poindexter and others who had been thinking like this as well. Coming back convinced that it's got to be drama. My initial idea of game show was thrown out, and it's got to be drama. And you know, it's again, you know, sorry, because I'm in America, I can use this phrase a lot, so I'll say it's a no-brainer again. But it is, think about it, this is not new. Teaching through story is not new. And I see we've got people from many different cultures here. In every single culture in history, we have taught people through story. We teach our kids through story. We read them books. We tell fables, legends, whatever. All of them often have some form of real sort of story behind them. And the other thing is that the issues that we are dealing with are not slogan issues. You know, they're not issues that you can say, you know, wear a condom, prevent HIV. Duh. You know. it doesn't hit here, whereas story can. And then this wonderful thing of parasocial interaction, where the gap between reality and fiction completely blurs, where people actually begin to see themselves in the characters. And Arvind has written with Ev and others a lot on this, and wonderful stories about the Archers soap opera in the UK, which in the 50s was the most listened to radio program in England. 3 out of 5 British adults were listening to this radio soap every week. And one of the key characters died in a fire. Her name was Grace. And apparently there was national mourning for a week. All press in the UK had big banner headlines: Grace Archer dies in stable fire. So the power of narrative to completely transport people, and as a result to impact heavily on how they see the world, was profound. And this is the sort of thinking that I had at the time, which was that I think where some of the innovation was that right from the beginning I didn't set up Soul City to deal with one issue. It was what I was trying to do is to set up something that would deal with many issues over time, and to have something that would be a brand builder of which we could, like a Christmas tree, place things. And I also started off with the understanding that if we were going to compete, it had to be as good as, if not better than anything else out there. Just because it had a social value, people were not going to listen or watch. And I went to a bunch of ad agencies and they said, oh, well, hi, you're a doctor, and nice idea, come back with money. Because I didn't even know production companies existed. I was just a doctor. And somebody had talked to somebody who was at an ad agency who said, hey, there's this crazy young doctor and he's got these ideas and maybe you should talk to him. So one day I was working in Casualty and this very smart folder arrives addressed to me. And it is a proposal from a production company. And, to give you an idea, when you're covered in various forms of human excrement, and it's not a great place to be working in a Casualty, and you get this really smart proposal. It's a bit of a, and so I didn't know that there were any other productions companies out there. So I said, okay, well, I didn't, if you guys think that, and they helped me. And, so that's how, if one wants to know, how did I start producing? Well, I didn't, thankfully. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here today. The other thing was to go multimedia right from the beginning. Is that, radio at that stage was still much more impactful than television. And to back it up with print. And this ongoing vehicle concept of more than one series, building a brand over time, and then having multiple topics. So you think of some of your favorite sort of dramas and soaps, etc. You build up and you love those characters. It takes time to build that. So rather than waste it, the whole idea has been to run it over time. The other thing that I suppose coming out of a public health background was to understand that we were looking, by speaking to our audiences about barriers to change, is that I may be a doctor, but I actually don't know why people don't change their behavior. And unless I speak to the people we're trying to reach. So core to Soul City's success, funnily enough, both on a production level and on an impact level, has been the research process. It on average takes us 18 months to develop a new series, and most of that, 2 years, is the research process. And it's a sort of combination between what the experts say and what the audience is telling us. And in particular, looking at barriers to change. And then we write, and the other big thing we do, which is unusual within the sort of production world, is pre-text. Just because I think it's a great script doesn't mean to say it's a great script. It's the number of times that we've tested it where people love the story, but in fact the message is completely different. And as a doctor, one of the things we get taught is first do no harm. And media, I don't know how many of you, most of you are probably involved in media, I think it's quite a good maxim, first do no harm. And, how much harm is done. So essentially, that's why there's a huge amount spent on pre-testing, and then the intervention. And then I would be amiss to say that I am very close to the beginning of this, still working with these ideas. A friend of a friend who was a doctor at the clinic came and had said to this woman here, Shireen Usden, there's this guy, he's crazy, he's got these ideas. Fortunately, she's as crazy as I am. And she arrived one day and said, you don't know who I am, but I'm coming to work with you even if you can't pay me. And I couldn't. And she brought an extensive public health background, a lot of rigor. I get bored quickly. She brought the rigor. And together, you know, she was really, as Arvin knows, a key driving force behind the success. She is still at Soul City. So what is Soul City? The first, how are we doing for time? Friday, okay. The first sort of series was, the intervention is based on, it's a serialized form of drama. So it's drama, it's not soap opera. It is, it's varied over time between half hours and full hours. It is, strangely enough, popular in a whole lot of other places, including Papua New Guinea. It, funnily enough, is based in that same Soul City as that township, Alexandria. And the seat of the drama is that clinic I was working in. So in the first series, we actually developed, we had the cameras and stuff, and we were working, but we, fortunately, were not acting. Again, otherwise it would have been a disaster. But I think I may have been like Hitchcock, where I actually walked across the set once. And then, as a backup, again, using the power of the brand, etc., etc., a lot of print information, and I think we've distributed about 40 million copies of booklets across 10 countries now, and we'll talk a bit about that later. And this was all in the run-up to '94. And so we were, in this period, developing this, finding money. That's a whole other story which I won't go into. And in '94, Nelson Mandela became the first democratically elected president of South Africa. And we had voting. There was, unfortunately, in the run-up, there was violence, but on the day of the election, it was, those are the sort of historic pictures. And we were in production in that period. And 6 weeks after the first democratic election, Soul City went on air for the first time. And these are just some press clippings from the time about Soul City, which began as a sort of 6:30 in the evening and migrated then into an 8 o'clock slot as it became popular. And it was about that time. That's the only one I could find. And again, I couldn't find in my own archives. You've got to blame Google again. So,
yeah, I think this was taken in Brasilia.
Yeah,
no, definitely not, Arvin. I'm right next to you. So it was about that time, shortly after that, that I had the pleasure of meeting Ed Rogers and Arvin, who I had heard about but only then met, and subsequently have built up a friendship with Arvin and colleagues. And it was at that time that, you know, we'd done a lot of what I call shooting. You know, a lot of, I think this is a good idea, let's do it. And I think, how about all of this? And we then started aiming. You know, we started to think more considerately about what we were trying to do. And by this point, we had been able to draw upon a whole range of theories that existed out there. And one of the theories that influenced us a lot was public health theory, called health promotion theory, which is really understanding that individuals do not exist. You know, a lot of interventions are aimed at individuals. You must stop smoking. You must wear your seatbelt. You must not drink and drive. But the reality is that we all are not islands. We actually are influenced profoundly by what's happening in our communities and by our peers, our families, and then the socio-political environment around us. So if you think about promoting safety belt wearing, if legislative laws don't exist to outlaw it, you know, it's got to be all three. And so this model helped us a lot to understand how to do interventions around a range of things, because every single intervention issue you can think of at these three levels, and it's a very simple way of thinking about it. Then you know, the example that some of you have seen, and for those of you that have, please forgive me, you'll see it again. It's probably an example that typifies our work, is summed up in this thing on a series we did on violence against women, where we were able to take a lot of this thinking around individual community, working with partners, socio-political environment, and bring it all together into an intervention for the first time. And what I'm going to show you is a clip from the television series. We may need to dim the light slightly if that is possible. Which this, in fact, what this does is it takes a 13-part series, and in 5 or 6 minutes it consolidates it down into a little storyline. So what you're seeing is an edit from a 13-hour series. And then this is when I absolutely hope things work. Aha, you see. Things were going well.
That's okay. I don't know how to do it.
I'm sure you can lip read, aren't you?
Well, it's subtitled, that's good.
Subtitled, but obviously, excuse me for this. I'm so sorry.
No, I think he's fixing it. He's fixing behind you.
Oh, is he fixing it behind you? Okay.
Trying it sound this
Okay, fine.
Where's the mute button?
I don't see it.
There's gone.
There, okay. Okay. It's still on mute. It's still on mute.
Is it? Where?
Yeah.
You know what I'm going to do is this, is that I am going to just do this if you don't mind. It will take me 1 second.
It's on mute on the computer.
On the computer.
Aha, you see, somebody's servant.
There it is.
Aha, all right. At this point you can sing amongst yourselves or whatever.
We can recite the dialogue.
Sorry?
We can recite the dialogue.
You can recite the dialogue just to see how sort of observant you've been. I'll just try to reload this DVD now. Okay, I'm going to come back to that because it'll just sort of take a bit of time. So. Isn't this the way that things operate? Sorry?
It looks like you closed the window where the movie was playing.
It's going to now come up now because I've just reopened it. It should now come up. And what's so fantastic is I had it all set up and it was playing. So somebody here has done it. And you can work out who that is.
We presume it goes better when you're operating on something.
Not always, no. And this is part of the reason why I moved out of medicine. The sort of trail of dead bodies behind me was... yeah, why didn't you do that? I'll tell you what we're going to do is, I'm going to move on to something else and come back to this. And you can... This is will you play this DVD?
Yes.
It will.
Oh,
Okay.
is this region 2?
Probably.
Okay.
Move back to
I'm
me.
so
Okay,
sorry.
I'll tell you what we're going to do is we are going to move back to this in a second. It's going to work, and in the interim I'm going to move on to something else. What I'm going to show you is we're going to play that when it is available to play, and in the interim I'm just going to carry on, and you're going to pretend you saw it.
It was amazing.
Did you enjoy it?
Yes.
Just play it here. Yeah.
You used to find the cue.
Strongly identified with the black. Six kilometers long to happen. Seem to moment. I sent you in home.
Family event. Family team. Lady, Tim, come on, let's have a moment. Tim, aye. Just because Sufumani sukoro kwenye mani anything unaliti kinya sukanyana unalokaka na katumika na kumule mwe lata. Bataka, I'm talking to you, man. You take this shot back. You understand? Tell me, I'm still talking to your mother. Tell me, okay. I'm talking to you. Cheeky, you don't show me any respect.
The abuse continues despite Taban's promises to stop, and the community outside witnesses silently.
We see a lot of violence in this hospital. A lot of it domestic violence. Okay. Look, I brought your number to phone if you change your mind. See you later.
When Matlakala hears the story of another abused woman, she recognizes not only their physical injuries, but also the self-blame that all too familiar damaged self-esteem. It is a turning point. She takes the big step of challenging her neighbors at a community policy forum, with her father by her side.
Mr. Swinton, the lower sheriff department. The record order will be there. this protection order. The police station. Donga. You want to come to me? I won't tell her what it. I won't tell her what it about this. I won't tell her what it.
That, as I say, sums up a lot of the approach, because in 3 different ways you'll see, first of all, this is really interesting. This is looking at the level of community. Outside of South Africa, this concept of beating pots and pans had never been, it was from South America, we'd read about it. And so we introduced it into the drama as a way that a community, part of the barriers for communities was getting involved getting involved in domestic violence is not something people do. It's not my problem, as you saw in the drama there. And here was a tool that people could use, and it was a marker too. And about 6 months later, this picture appeared in one of the newspapers in the country, down in Cape Town. And it says, the idea for the Pots and Pans campaign sprang from the Soul City television program. And so, probably one of the most remarkable examples of life imitating art, if looking at impact. But drama can deal with all 3 of these levels. It can get to policymakers, it can look at community issues, it can look at the person. But what we do is really, and this is where some of Ev Rogers' work comes in, which is looking at diffusion of innovation and looking at getting to early adopters, people who actually catalyze change. And doing that requires a much more direct approach, which this I call the Disney effect, because you know how Disney basically takes the stuff and then makes a packet of money by flogging stuff to your kids. That's the Disney effect, where you take the brand credibility and popularity, you then leverage it for commercial gain. And what we do is that we leverage the brand popularity and credibility for social gain. And the ways we do that is, as you've seen through print, and as you can see, using characters out of the thing, direct training around the legislation, which at that point wasn't passed. So that Domestic Violence Act was still in the courts. It wasn't yet implemented. And through the partnerships, it was implemented in this period because of the pressure from people. And then working with journalists as well, again at the level of policy. And then just quickly, we, about 8 years ago, saw that kids were really keen on Soul City. It's one of the 2 most watched programs in South Africa. But our research process had never been for children. And so we started Soul Buddies, which is very similar, except it's about a group of kids between the ages of 8 and 12 who get together after school and they do cool things, including getting involved in their community. And it's all of those things. And kids said to us, we want to be Soul Buddies. And we now have 5,000 clubs with over 90,000 members. Yeah. It's, I think, the biggest children's movement in South Africa, where these kids get together after school, facilitated usually by a school teacher. We provide them with materials and curriculum. And then we moved regionally about 7 or 8 years ago. We moved into those countries, Zambia, Tanzania, Zambia, Malawi, Mozambique, Zimbabwe, Lesotho, Swaziland, Botswana, Namibia, not Angola or Madagascar. And in those countries we basically did, instead of a sort of brand dump, what we did is we worked with partners to actually spawn their own initiatives, using Soul City's materials, adapting them in the context, but very specifically trying to train them up in this concept of actually a research and theory-based approach to social change. And so those are the brands in different countries in the region. So Soul City is not known. Evaluation, it's, as I say, just look at those statistics. It's done pretty well. It's probably after Sesame Street the most evaluated intervention of its kind. I'm not sure about that, but probably close to. So we know a lot about impact. It's in 22 languages, 24 series, 35 million books, etc. And then, you know, a lot of people say to me, but how do you measure impact? You know, all of these things. And for me, it's about people. It's about people saying, this has changed my life. And then you get things, you know, that this is a T-shirt we produced 10 years ago. And we saw that this picture was taken about 2 years ago. And Soul City FM. There are 10 or 12 communities around the country that have called themselves Soul City. This is, you know, so all of these things are markers in the sand, as well as a huge amount of research that has shown undeniable impact. So consistent, qualitative, it's multimedia and synergy has been shown to be more effective than one medium without any doubt. This ongoing effect has been more stuff done by Johns Hopkins University called the propensity score analysis has been used extensively in the evaluations, which allows you to actually take out the clutter in terms of looking at cause and effect. And of course, you know, I'm fortunate to be here receiving an award, but in fact this is not my work. This is the work of a big team of people of whom this is part of. And so the award really is to acknowledge their work and not just the contribution I've made. I, after 16 years, left Soul City last year. It still continues with those core people. It's doing probably better than ever, and you know, go figure why. But it's doing well now, and so I then moved on to thinking a little bit, and I'm now going to wrap up. Is really about the core elements of human change. And the problem, one of the issues with Soul City is it's very issue-based, and as a result, it's extremely well known in parts of our population and not in others. It's very, you know, and because of the issues. And so I've been looking really for a deeper intervention, and that got me to found Heartlines, which I ran in conjunction with Soul City until last year, where I handed over. And essentially what it works on is basically social cohesion. It's basically saying, it doesn't matter whether you're in the States or in South Africa, once you get below the level of the poverty line and you're dealing with, say, you know, in any country, all of the big issues are actually driven by a failure of relationship. You look at domestic violence, that's a failure of relationship. HIV/AIDS has been shown to be relational. Most of the big issues are driven by a breakdown in the sort of fabric of society. And so my, you know, intervention was, I mean, to put it in a sort of soundbite, is mobilizing people to do what is right, to fix what is wrong. For some people, that's just paying the taxes and not, you know, giving a bribe to the policeman. On the other end of the spectrum are people who actually get involved in social action. And again, a very sort of, just to give you a bit of an idea about how we're thinking, is it takes the diffusion of innovation model and basically puts it back to back. Because on the one hand, you've got change agents who are really bad news for society. They're innovators and they're bad news. On the other hand, you've got change agents who are good news for society. And there's a war going on between them. You know, which way shall we go? And in a country such as ours, with a lot of social change, there is this contested ground here about the type of people we're going to be. And our objective, essentially, is to fan the flames of this group of people here, the people who are innovators, who are moving in social cohesion, who are making a difference in their communities, to connect them, to support them, to tell their stories. Because at the moment, it's these people's stories who get told mainly. And that pushes a social norm. And then, borrowing your president's slogan, to give the people in the middle a sense that the little changes that they can make in their lives actually make a difference, and yes, they can. And you know, our objective on a macro level is that. And really, Ed Rogers' work has been popularized by Malcolm Gladwell through the tipping point. And so, you know, Malcolm Gladwell has simply taken a concept that existed. But ultimately, we're looking at a tipping point moving in that direction. And it's about trying to support those innovators, those people of good intent on the one side. And I'm not going to show you this. What we did is we started off with 8 films, 8 TV films, each introduced by Nelson Mandela. And each film dealt with a gritty reality, but dealt with a different value and relationship. How are we doing for time?
You can go ahead a bit.
This is 1.5 minutes.
Do it.
I don't know whether you
Do it.
And so what we did about 2 years ago was to show this series back to back. There were 8 films, and they showed on all our public broadcasting. So we're different to the States, by the way. We have 4 public channels. Most people do not have cable. And so on 3 channels, you can get to 80% of the population. And we showed these films, the same film, on all 3 channels simultaneously. And in that week, we then used other media to drive a discussion around the key sort of value that was being portrayed. I knew it would. This is now embedded. So I thought we would be. I don't know what you guys are doing. I really don't.
Today I will learn.
Today, I will give my compassion first, and my judgment last.
I will persevere, no matter how difficult the path may change. I want to be honest in all I say and all I do.
Today, I will be responsible, not just for myself, but for my family. I will strive to forgive because forgiveness leads to power.
I will learn self-control because it's a time for everything in the heaven.
I will accept you, not because we're the same, but because God made us different.
Today I will show grace. It is a second chance that may change our life.
Values sustain any walk of freedom. And values commit us to a continued walk.
So just a snippet out of one of the films. So just in closing, I mean, that's basically what we're involved in now. That is then leveraged into a whole lot of different areas using those films. That particular one, Best Youth and Family Drama at BAC. And we're getting involved, finding those change makers in communities, supporting them, etc. And then the newest sort of move is into the use of the internet and taking entertainment into education and the concepts into the internet. Networking people, but also with social content, trying to connect people where they are, and it's called For Good. And at that point, I thank you.
We have a few minutes to take questions, and I hope that you'll be brief so that Garth will be able to answer them.
Garth, my name's Lauren Siegel, and I'm doing
been doing some work in South Africa for many years. There's an organization called NextAid, and I've been a subscriber to the Soul City newsletter for many years. Got the environment one this morning, so it's really wonderful to hear you. I just have a couple quick questions.
Just one.
Okay. What do you think of Love Life's messaging? As it's changed?
Yeah, it has
evolved,
changed.
it's gotten better?
Look, the biggest problem with Love Life is that they didn't go through the process we talked about there.
Okay.
That's the bottom line. Is that if they had, they would never have taken the direction they did. So, you know, how do you judge stuff? It can look cool, it can look great, it looks pretty, but unless you've done the research up front, you actually can do more harm than good. So that's the problem with Love Life, is that they were pressurized to move from 0 to 100 in no minutes. And this type of work you can't do in a hurry.
And what is Love Life?
It was in about 1996, the Kaiser Family Foundation basically took a number of groups that they supported and said, we're going to basically cut the HIV epidemic by half in 5 years. And they embarked on a strategy which was largely driven by some very provocative billboards. So their thing was billboard driven. I mean, they literally had like 500 billboards. And it was sort of quite, you know, advertising people loved it because they were like crazy slogans, etc. But it was confusing and it had very little impact. So that's what it was.
Other questions? Yes.
Carola Weil, Associate Dean here at the Annenberg School, and thank you so much for sharing this with us. Let me just quickly ask you about cultural differences. Obviously, you're working in a multicultural society, multi-ethnic, that is beset with a variety of conflicts. Do you think that your concept translates equally across color lines, across language lines? You know that it's portrayed in many different languages, but if you look at development aid, much of that has to be very locally specific. So if people aren't dressing the same way, if they're not gesturing the same way, it creates a different kind of message. What happens with your concept when you take it into a conflict region?
There are two answers to that. Number one is that when we've moved into other countries, what has been very clear is, in fact, yes, there's been adaptations, but surprisingly, the vast majority of content stays the same. So, right, I'd say there's a sort of 80-20 mix, where 80% of these things are human stories. That clip you saw on violence against women may not be a context that any of you know about, but you could relate to the story. So, yes, people are able to then say, it's actually not me and therefore not my issue. So cultural specificity is important. One of the things, so in South Africa, Soul City has done particularly well, particularly with the black population of the country, which is by far the majority. The other sort of ethnic minorities, because they're not really represented in here, haven't really, and the issues are very sort of lower socioeconomic issues. Heartlines, on the other thing, actually has crossed over. Because we are not addressing issues as much as we are addressing sort of universal human values. So I think there's a sort of a nuanced answer to that.
Arden. Garth, one of the things that I've said for many years with all humility is that Soul City does what we teach in classes, it does on the ground, and it does it better. And that's with all humility. I was wondering if you could say a little bit about the community makeover show, because when I was in South Africa last, just to see the process that Soul City was going through, you know, taking the idea of extreme makeover and turning it into community makeover, and it went on the air a few weeks ago.
That's right, yeah.
Is that your show, Garth?
Sorry?
Is that your show?
No, not anymore, because I've left Soul City. So,
oh, so
but I was
Soul
part
City,
of.
I haven't heard of that. Soul
No,
City Community Makeover.
Yes, so Soul City's got something called Kwanda, and I mean, obviously I was part of the development process, but it's on air now. It's really the concept of extreme makeover, of actually, and also reality television but actually getting communities to compete with each other around making themselves sort of brighter, fitter, happier. And it's, as I understand, I mean, the actual making of it has been a huge challenge, but the impact has already been seen. As people finally are seeing communities that they can relate to organizing around social issues. So I think that it's still early days, but it's an exciting innovation.
Sonny.
Yeah, it might be.
Sonny Fox, a distinguished guest.
That's it. I don't have to ask a question. It might be interesting to hear how Soul City is funded now, as opposed to when you started.
Look, you know, one of the problems with the advantages of our model over, say, a Hollywood model is that we own this, which allows us huge scope. But our audience is not a paying audience. So we license Soul City, the television and radio products, for only a fraction of what about half of what it costs us to produce. So we're still very dependent on commercial financing. BP has been a funder of Soul City for 16 years. On donor financing and also on our own government. But more recently been looking at innovative ways of sort of setting up for-profit arms that will in turn fund the organization. But it's like a public hospital. The reality is that there are some things that actually ultimately are going to need, you know, sources of funding that are not completely commercially based. So its funding model has remained similar over the years, and as now Heartlines.
Yes.
Helen Wong, a doctoral student here at Annenberg. I'm interested in communication technology and health promotion. I've done work on enrichment education. We touch upon the role of the internet and networking, especially now we're talking about network society and all these kind of global changes going on at the same time. So I wonder if you could elaborate a little bit on what are the strategies you're using to incorporate internet-related or mobile technologies in your overall design.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's for us. It's the next frontier. It really is, because that's the way we've got a population of 48 million people and there are 50 million cell phones. And internet. There's 10% internet access right now. The estimates are going to be that in the next sort of 3 to 5 years it will be like 80%, and people are that's where they're going to get their media from. So I think that the social networking trends are very interesting, but I think in our context, and it's a different to the US context, people's primary desire is, great, entertain me, connect me to my friends, etc., but help me live my life. And so what we're doing is designing a social network that actually has content. As well, which is almost profiled to who you are and where you are, connects people of like mind in the same place, but gives them content around education and health and business and all sorts of things, but using some of the edutainment strategies, which is to not just do an information dump, but to do it in a way that is engaging. And because it's a one-to-many and all of these sort of things, we can do a lot of interactive things, which we're, but this, talk to me in 10 years' time. Just beginning to innovate in this area.
Yes.
Hi. My name is Laurel Feltz. I'm a PhD student. I'm curious about the process of marrying the research with the drama development. How do your findings make their way into the development of characters and storylines and dialogue, character arches, etc.?
Okay, I mean that's like at the heart of what we do. So that sort of thing where I showed you all the arrows with the expert research and the stuff from focus groups and in-depth interviews all comes together in a workshop of sort of 2 or 3 days, where the researchers themselves, and we are fortunate enough, and Arvin knows some of them, to have just the most outstanding group of community researchers who are able to come and give real substance to what people are saying. But at the same time, you've got all the academic stuff around, the causes of violence against women or whatever. And our scriptwriters are in that process. So they're not sort of handed a document, they're part of that process. And together, we talk about integration of storylines. And it's, it's a skill that they've built up over time as well, I mean, it's something that is almost unheard of, but I mean, we throw out really fantastic storylines, because they're just not working from a message point of view. You know, here you probably a writer would kill you. You know, but that's the advantage of owning what we do. You know, I think the model that Hollywood Health and Society is using is a very clever model in terms of trying to really, in a subtle way, impact on these writers. But we are fortunate to be a bit more blunt and able to say no.
Could you elaborate more upon the community research process?
Yeah, it's a combination. I mean, what was interesting is that previous question about differences. And we have 11 different language groups. We have urban, we have rural, we have poor, we have rich, etc. So initially, we actually tried to cover all bases. We did, you know, lots of focus groups in every ethnic group around the country at great expense and great time, in-depth interviews, and those are all taped and then transcribed down into documents, etc. And the more we did it, the more we actually saw that the key issues were the same across all of these groups, and we were able to actually pare down. And it was really just a rural-urban divide rather than a racial divide or a tribal divide. So it's much more focused now, and it's rural-urban, and it's usually, and it's men and women, and it's age. So those are the sort of ways in which we break up the groups. Sometimes, if it's something on relationships, we will have men and women together, but then we'll also have them apart. That's when people really tell you what they think.
The Rogers Prize comes in two parts. Tonight is the trophy part, where Garth will be receiving a trophy at the Writers Guild of America in a room full of Hollywood's top television writers and producers, so they can get to see what Garth does. The other part comes in an envelope. And please join me in congratulating this year's winner.